A poor woman cried at the grave every Sunday, until Mafia boss appeared and said, "My wife is here too." The rain poured down like it had a vendetta, slapping against the graveyard's stone monuments as Andrea Hayes knelt before her sister's headstone. The damp chill of the autumn air seeped through her thin coat, but she didn't care. Every Sunday for 5 years, she had come here, rain or shine, to honor Sophia, the twin she had lost far too soon. The bouquet of white lilies in her hands was the same one she brought every time, the flowers almost as fragile as the memories they represented. Today, however, something felt different. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the weight of it pressed against her chest, making her breath come a little faster. She whispered the words she had said to the grave countless times before, but as the wind whipped around her, they sounded almost foreign. She reached down to place the lilies on the wet earth, feeling the same heartache that had never quite left her since Sophia's tragic death. Then, the sound of a car engine interrupted her thoughts, and she froze. The sleek black limousine slid to a stop on the muddy path, its polished surface a stark contrast to the raw, weather-beaten cemetery. The door opened, and a man stepped out. His suit was too expensive, his presence too commanding. Andrea didn't need to see his face to know that he wasn't here for a funeral. Her fingers clenched around the flowers as a strange awareness prickled down her spine. The man's gaze was fixed on her, even before he reached the grave. It was like he knew exactly who she was, though they had never met. His shoes clicked on the stone path as he walked toward her, his steps measured, deliberate. She could feel him standing behind her, the space between them charged with an unspoken tension. His voice broke the silence, low and filled with a strange heaviness. "My wife is here too." Andrea's breath hitched, and she slowly turned to face him, startled by the intensity of his words and the piercing darkness of his eyes. He was tall, with sharp features and a presence that made her heart skip a beat. There was something familiar about him, something that pulled at the edges of her memory. "I'm Carlo Mancini," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried weight, as if he was used to being listened to. He extended a hand, his knuckles marred by a scar that caught Andrea's attention for a split second. "And you have her face." Andrea's pulse quickened as the realization hit her like a thunderclap. This man, this stranger, knew something she didn't. His eyes, dark and intense, never left hers, and in them she saw a glimmer of recognition. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rose to her feet, her hands trembling. She didn't know what to say. "Sophia never told me she was married," she whispered, her voice shaking as the rain continued to soak her through. Carlo's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer. "She wasn't just my wife," he said, the words coming out with a hardness that made her flinch. "She was my salvation. And apparently she kept secrets from both of us." Quote, "The wind howled, and a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, casting their faces in stark relief. Andrea's mind raced, the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed beginning to fall into place. But there was so much more to this story, so many questions she wasn't ready to ask, and so many answers she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. The rain picked up again, harder now, and Carlo glanced over at the waiting limousine. "My driver can take us somewhere dry to talk," he offered, his voice low, but the authority in it was undeniable. Andrea hesitated, torn between the need for answers and the warning bells ringing in her head. "I don't know you," she said, clutching her purse tighter against her side, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "But you knew Sophia," Carlo countered, his eyes softening just slightly as they landed on the flowers she had brought for her sister. "And I have a daughter who deserves to know her mother had a twin." The word daughter hit her harder than any storm ever could. It was like a switch had been flipped in her mind. A child, Sophia's daughter. The thought of a little girl, a piece of her sister still out there, made her pulse race. Before she could respond, Carlo shrugged off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, strangely foreign and comforting at the same time, almost made her forget the storm, the cemetery, everything. Almost. "1 hour," he promised, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I just need an hour, please." Andrea stood frozen for a moment, staring at her sister's grave. The woman who had kept so many secrets from her, who had died with so many unanswered questions between them. And now a stranger, who claimed to have known her so intimately, was offering her answers. With a final, lingering look at Sophia's headstone, Andrea nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely carried away by the rain. 1 hour. And just like that, her Sunday ritual had been shattered and a new, dangerous path had begun. The inside of the limousine was unlike anything Andrea had ever seen. Sleek, black leather seats, polished wood panels, and an air of luxury that felt like a world she didn't belong to. It was strange how the car seemed to close off the rest of the world, making everything outside disappear into the dark, rain-soaked streets of Chicago. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was crossing a line she could never come back from. Carlo sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. His phone buzzed constantly, the sound of it piercing the silence, but he didn't pick it up. His focus was entirely on her, studying her like she was some kind of mystery he needed to solve. Andrea tried to settle into the seat, her hand still clutching the worn purse on her lap. She felt exposed, her entire life being scrutinized in a way she had never experienced before. She was just a nurse. Just a woman who had been trying to make sense of the grief that had consumed her life for the past 5 years. But sitting here, in a car surrounded by wealth and power, she felt small. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the way he was trying to read her, to figure out what she might do next. The car rolled smoothly through the city streets, the lights from the skyscrapers reflecting off the wet pavement, but Andrea couldn't focus on any of it. Her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the strange encounter. The man sitting across from her was the husband of her sister, her twin sister, a woman she thought she knew better than anyone, but she didn't know this side of her. This man, this life. "You're quiet," Carlo said suddenly, his voice pulling her out of her thoughts. "I didn't expect you to be so composed." Andrea glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. Composed? She was barely holding it together, torn between the desire to understand her sister's hidden life and the reality that it was so far beyond anything she could have imagined. "Why didn't you ever tell me about her?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why didn't she tell me?" Quote. Carlo leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming softly on the armrest, his expression hardening. "There are things people like me have to protect," he said quietly, but with such conviction that Andrea could hear the weight of every word. "Sophia didn't want you to be part of my world. She didn't want you to be in danger." Andrea's breath caught in her throat. "In danger?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Carlo nodded, his jaw tight. "You've already walked into it by coming with me. You're here because Sophia kept you hidden from it. I've spent years trying to keep my enemies from finding you, but now—" The car slowed as it pulled up to an enormous building, its glass and steel facade gleaming in the dark like some kind of fortress. Carlo's gaze softened, just for a moment as he looked at her. "Now, we don't have much time," he continued, his voice serious again. "Things are moving faster than I expected. My enemies, they're closer than I thought." Andrea watched him as the car stopped and the driver opened the door. She followed Carlo out, the cold night air biting at her skin. The building loomed above her like an impenetrable wall, and she wondered how she had ended up here, on the edge of a world she never wanted to be part of. Inside, the lobby was all marble floors and towering columns, with security cameras everywhere. Carlo didn't even flinch as he passed through, walking like he owned the place, which she supposed he probably did. They stepped into an elevator, the doors closing with a soft chime. The moment it began to rise, Andrea's stomach churned. This was real. She wasn't just visiting a grave anymore. She wasn't just a sister, mourning her twin. She was stepping into the life that Sophia had kept hidden from her. A life tangled with crime, power, and now a child she had never known existed. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into a penthouse that was as cold and sterile as a hospital room. Carlo waved a hand at the space, indicating she could sit anywhere. Andrea hesitated, but Carlo had already moved toward a bar in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid with a calm precision that felt rehearsed. He handed one to her without a word, his eyes still sharp as they studied her face. "This is insane," Andrea muttered, staring at the drink in her hand. She wasn't sure what to do with it, but it felt like the right thing to do was drink it. Carlo raised an eyebrow. You're right. But if you want answers, you have to keep your wits about you. This is bigger than you think. Andrea's mind raced, her medical instincts working overtime as she thought about the child, Gina, Sophia's daughter, Sophia's secret. She looked at Carlo, her heart heavy with so many emotions she didn't know how to process. What happens now? She asked, needing to know what her place was in all of this. Carlo didn't answer right away. He studied her with a level of intensity that made her feel like a puzzle piece he was trying to fit into his life. Now, he said finally, you stay here. You're not safe anymore. Neither of us are. Quote, the penthouse felt colder now, like the walls were closing in on Andrea. The lights of the city stretched out before her, but they felt distant, far away from the quiet chaos she was suddenly a part of. The glass windows looked out over the lake, the water dark and endless, just like the questions swirling in her mind. Carlo's presence was almost suffocating as he stood at the bar, pouring himself another drink, his back to her. He didn't seem like a man used to being vulnerable, used to being in a situation where he didn't have control. And yet, here he was, pouring whiskey as if he didn't know what to say next. His cold, calculated exterior had slipped for just a moment, leaving Andrea to wonder what lay beneath. I didn't know she was married, Andrea said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She needed to say something, anything, to fill the uncomfortable silence. The truth of what she had just learned was too much to take in all at once. I never even knew she had a life like this. Quote. Carlo looked over his shoulder, his dark eyes studying her for a moment before he replied, his voice low. Sophia didn't want you to know. She didn't want you involved. This life, it's dangerous. I don't blame her for keeping it from you. Andrea felt a knot twist in her stomach. She kept so many secrets, she whispered, feeling the sting of betrayal. I always thought I knew everything about her. We were twins. We were supposed to be close. Carlo set down his glass, his gaze now focused on her with an intensity that made her heart race. You weren't supposed to know, Andrea, and you still don't know the whole truth. Her breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Carlo hesitated, as if debating whether to reveal more. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than before. The night Sophia died, it wasn't just a car accident. It was meant for me. He paused, letting the words sink in before adding, Sophia was caught in the crossfire. Andrea's world tilted. Everything she had believed about her sister's death had been a lie. What are you saying? She asked, her voice shaking. Are you telling me someone killed her because of you? Carlo turned to face her, his eyes dark with a mix of regret and anger. Yes, he said simply, his voice hard. And now, they want you too, because of who you are. Andrea felt like she couldn't breathe. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, like the earth had tilted just enough to send her falling. She had come here for answers about Sophia's life, and instead, she was learning about a world she didn't even know existed, a world of danger, deceit, and power. Why are you telling me this? Andrea asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? Carlo didn't answer right away. He crossed the room to where she stood, his footsteps deliberate, the weight of his presence making her feel even more exposed. I want you to understand what's at stake here, he said softly. You're not just a nurse anymore. You're not just Sophia's twin. You're a target, and I need you to stay safe. For her sake. For my daughter's sake. Quote. Andrea's heart thudded in her chest at the mention of Gina, the little girl who had been caught up in all of this without even knowing it. The child who was now living a life she hadn't chosen, a life shaped by secrets and danger. I don't know what you expect me to do, Andrea said, her voice breaking. I'm just a nurse. I don't belong in your world. Carlo's expression softened, just for a moment. Neither did Sophia, but she chose to be a part of it. She made a life here, and she made sure you were safe from it. I'm trying to do the same, to protect you. Andrea's mind was spinning. She had always known her sister was keeping something from her, but she never imagined it would be something this dangerous. Why me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why bring me into this now? What am I supposed to do? Carlo walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. Because you're the only family I have left, he said quietly, and you're the only one who can help me protect Gina. She deserves to know who her mother really was. She deserves to have family, real family, around her. Andrea felt the weight of his words, the responsibility pressing down on her chest. She had no choice but to stay. She couldn't leave Gina. Not now. Not when she had already seen the little girl's trusting eyes, the hope she had when she saw her aunt for the first time. But the truth was, Andrea had no idea what she was stepping into. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for the violence, the power struggles, or the lies that had been woven into every part of her sister's life. I don't know how to help you, she whispered. I don't even know where to start. Carlo turned back to her, his face set with determination. You start by staying with me, by staying with Gina, and by not letting them win. Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Carlo's eyes flicked to the door, his expression hardening instantly. Stay here, he said quietly, as if he were already expecting something to go wrong. Don't open the door unless it's me. Andrea nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but everything around her seemed to be moving too fast. The danger was real now, and there was no turning back. Andrea's pulse raced as she watched Carlo's every movement, his face impassive, but his eyes sharp with a quiet intensity that made her stomach churn. The knock at the door was a signal. Something was about to happen, and Andrea had no idea what she had gotten herself into. Carlo didn't wait for her to speak. He turned toward the door, his movements deliberate, his jaw set in a hard line. He was prepared for whatever came next. Andrea's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the couch, her heart pounding in her chest. She had thought coming here would bring her answers, but now all she felt was fear. She wasn't ready for this world, not the darkness, the power, the danger. Another knock came, louder this time. I need to get this, Carlo said, his voice low but commanding. Stay here. I'll be right back. Andrea nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was giving him her consent or just trying to control the tremble in her limbs. She watched him walk to the door, his steps confident, like he had seen this moment 1,000 times before. When he opened the door, Andrea caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing in the hallway, and the weight of what she had just stepped into hit her with full force. She wasn't just in danger anymore. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was now involved in a war, a battle that wasn't hers to fight. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of raised voices, Carlo's low, firm command, and the unfamiliar voice of a man she couldn't see. Andrea's instincts kicked in, and she moved toward the door without thinking, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was happening, to make sense of the chaos. She froze as Carlo's voice echoed down the hallway, tense with a command she didn't understand. You'll stay in the safe room until further notice, he was saying, his tone unwavering. This is not negotiable. Andrea's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a warning, but there was nothing she could do. She had already been caught in a web of lies and danger that was far beyond her understanding. The figure outside the door moved, and Carlo closed the door behind him with a soft click. He turned back toward Andrea, his face now a mask of controlled emotion. Things just got complicated, he said quietly, his eyes dark with resolve. We have to leave. Now. Andrea's heart sank. She didn't know what had happened, but she could see it in Carlo's face. Things were about to escalate, and there was no way to stop it. Where are we going? She asked, her voice unsteady as she stood up from the couch, grabbing her purse and her jacket, her mind racing. We're going to Montana, Carlo replied. It's the safest place for you and Gina, and for me. We don't have time to waste. Andrea nodded, barely able to comprehend what was happening. She was stepping into a world she didn't belong to, a world where power, lies, and violence collided. But she had no choice. Her sister's legacy, Sophia's life and death, had dragged her into it, and now Gina needed her. The little girl who had lost her mother, the little girl who had already lost so much. The sound of the elevator doors opening interrupted her thoughts. Carlo's team was already moving, preparing to leave, and Andrea felt the gravity of the situation pressing down on her chest. She followed him down the hall, her mind racing with questions and fears she didn't know how to express. Outside, the storm had intensified, the wind howling through the streets, as if the city itself was preparing for a fight. Limousine was waiting for them, its engine humming with quiet power. Carlo's driver opened the door for them, and without a word, Andrea climbed inside, her heart heavy with uncertainty. As the limousine pulled away from the penthouse, Andrea looked out the window at the city, the lights flickering in the distance. Everything was changing, and she didn't know if she was ready for any of it. Carlo sat beside her, his expression unreadable, his eyes focused on something far beyond the city lights. "You should know," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "The Santini family is going to make a move. They're going to come after us. After you." Andrea's breath hitched. She had known things were dangerous, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. "I'm not going to let them hurt you," Carlo continued, his voice soft but filled with a fierce determination. "I'll protect you, and I'll protect Gina." Andrea's gaze flicked to his, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know how to help you," she whispered. "I don't know anything about this world." "You don't need to," Carlo replied, his gaze steady on her. "You just need to be there for her, for Gina. That's all I need from you." Andrea nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She had stepped into this world to protect her niece and to uncover the truth about her sister. As the limousine sped toward the unknown, Andrea knew that her life, the life she had known, was gone. But she also knew that she couldn't turn back. Not now. Sophia's secrets had brought her here, and now it was up to her to make sure the past didn't destroy the future.